If you stand in Times Square and look up at the debt clock, or if you pull the official figures from the US Treasury, you will see a number that defies human comprehension. It is currently spinning past $35 trillion and heading rapidly toward $38 trillion. To put that into perspective, if you stack 38 trillion $1 bills on top of each other, the pile would reach not just to the moon, but beyond it. For decades, politicians and economists have dismissed this number. They told us that deficits don't matter because we owe the money to ourselves, or that the debt is manageable as long as the economy grows. They treated the national debt like a scorecard in a video game, a high number that looks scary but has no real-world consequences. But in 2024, the math changed. We have entered a new era of fiscal reality, where the debt is no longer just a number. It is a predator that is beginning to consume the budget of the United States government. For the first time in history, the U.S. government is spending more on interest payments on the debt than it is spending on national defense. Think about that. We are spending more to pay off the bondholders of the past than we are to equip the military of the present. We are spending more on interest than on the entire Medicaid program. The interest bill alone is approaching $1 trillion a year. This creates a terrifying phenomenon known as the debt spiral. In a normal household, if you have too much debt, you cut your spending. You stop eating out. You cancel Netflix. But a government is not a household. A massive portion of U.S. government spending is mandatory. Social Security and Medicare are promises made to an aging population that cannot be politically broken. So the government cannot cut spending. Instead, to pay the interest on the old debt, the government has to issue new debt. It is borrowing from a new credit card to pay the minimum monthly balance on the old credit card. This increases the total debt, which increases the interest payments next year, which requires even more borrowing. It is a mathematical feedback loop that leads to exponential growth. The terrifying reality is that there is no conventional way out of this trap. There are only 3 traditional ways to reduce a sovereign debt burden of this magnitude, and 2 of them are politically impossible in the United States today. The first option is austerity. This means massive tax hikes and brutal spending cuts. To balance the budget and start paying down the debt, the government would have to double income taxes or abolish the U.S. military. Neither of those things is going to happen. Any politician who proposes cutting Social Security checks by 30% commits political suicide. Any president who proposes a 70% tax rate gets voted out in a landslide. The American economy is addicted to government spending. Pulling the plug would trigger a Great Depression instantly, so austerity is off the table. The second option is default. The government could simply walk up to the podium and say, "We are not paying." This is what Argentina or Russia has done in the past. But for the United States, the issuer of the global reserve currency, this is the nuclear option. The entire global financial system, every bank, every pension fund, every trade contract, is built on the foundation that U.S. Treasury bonds are risk-free. If the U.S. defaults, the global banking system collapses overnight. Trade stops. Credit cards stop working. It would be a financial apocalypse. So explicit default is also off the table. That leaves only one option. The third option. The option that every empire in history, from Rome to Weimar Germany to post-war Britain, has eventually chosen. It is the path of least resistance. It is the soft default. You don't refuse to pay the debt. You pay every single cent of it, but you pay it back in currency that is worth significantly less than when you borrowed it. You print the difference. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is the official, though unspoken, policy of the United States government. It is a process of financial repression designed to transfer wealth from savers to the state. The goal is to keep the interest rate on the debt lower than the rate of inflation. Let's do the math. If the government owes $30 trillion and inflation is 5%, the real value of that debt shrinks by 5% every year. In purchasing power terms, the government has just erased $1.5 trillion of debt in a single year without raising a single tax or cutting a single program. The bondholders get their money back, but that money buys fewer groceries and fewer houses, disguised as supply chain issues or transitory inflation. We are currently witnessing a historic shift in monetary policy called fiscal dominance. For 40 years, the Federal Reserve was the master. It raised interest rates to fight inflation, even if it hurt the economy. Today, the Treasury is the master. The debt is so high that the Fed cannot raise interest rates high enough to truly kill inflation, because doing so would bankrupt the US government. If interest rates went to 10% like they did in the 1980s, the interest payments on $38 trillion would be $3.8 trillion a year more than the total tax revenue of the country. The government would collapse. So, the Fed is forced to tolerate higher inflation. It is forced to keep rates lower than they should be. It is forced to become an enabler of the Treasury's spending. The independence of the central bank is dying. We are moving into an era where the money printer is permanently fused to the government budget. This is the hidden crisis. It isn't a sudden crash. It's a slow boil. The $38 trillion number will keep going up. It will hit 40 trillion, then 50 trillion. But the value of the dollar will keep going down. The government is betting that it can inflate away the debt faster than the market can panic. It is a dangerous high-wire act. If they print too slowly, the debt crushes them. If they print too slowly, the debt crushes them. If they print too fast, they trigger hyperinflation. They are trying to thread the needle, running inflation at 4 or 5% for a decade. This sounds manageable, but the compound effect is devastating. At 5% inflation, the value of your savings is cut in half in 14 years. That is the plan, to wipe out half the value of the national debt and half the value of your savings by the mid-2030s. To execute this, they use specific mechanisms. We are rerunning the exact economic playbook used by the United States after World War II. In 1945, the U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio hit 119%. The government didn't pay it off with taxes. It didn't default. It liquidated the debt through negative real interest rates. For a decade, the Federal Reserve capped interest rates at 2.5% while inflation averaged over 6%. Every year, the bondholders lost 3.5% of their purchasing power. This was a deliberate transfer of wealth from savers to the state. Today, this strategy is back, but it has been upgraded with 3 modern tools designed to ensure you do not notice the theft until it is too late. Tool number 1, the captive buyer. In a free market, if a government is $38 trillion in debt and spending recklessly, investors would demand a higher interest rate, but the US government cannot afford that. So it rigs the market by creating a captive audience through banking regulations. The government forces banks, insurance companies, and pension funds to hold US Treasury bonds. Regulators designate US Treasuries as high-quality liquid assets. Banks are legally required to hold these assets. It doesn't matter if the bonds pay virtually nothing or if they are losing value. The banks must buy them to stay in business. This creates artificial demand and forces the financial system to lend money to the government at suppression rates regardless of the risk. Tool number 2, the broken compass. If you want to pay people less, but you promise to pay them based on inflation, the easiest solution is to redefine inflation. Social Security payments and Treasury inflation-protected securities are linked to the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. If CPI is 10%, the government has to pay out 10% more. So the government has a multi-billion-dollar incentive to keep the CPI low. Since the 1980s, the methodology for calculating CPI has been quietly rewritten. They introduced substitution bias and hedonic adjustments. If the price of steak goes up, they assume you buy hamburger, so the index doesn't rise as much. If a car is more expensive but safer, they argue the price didn't really go up. These statistical sleights of hand save the government billions. If we use the 1980 methodology today, inflation would consistently be double the official number. Tool number 3, fiscal dominance and the central bank put. Historically, the Federal Reserve was independent. Under fiscal dominance, its primary job becomes keeping the Treasury solvent. When foreign nations like China or Japan stop buying U.S. debt, the Fed steps in as the buyer of last resort. It prints money to buy the bond that nobody else wants. This is quantitative easing. By buying the debt, the Fed artificially suppresses the yield. This keeps the government's interest bill affordable, but it floods the economy with new dollars. The result is the everything bubble. Stocks go up, real estate goes up, and asset prices disconnect from reality. It creates the illusion of wealth. Your 401k looks higher, but it is a monetary mirage. You have more dollars, but those dollars buy less than they did 10 years ago. The government is effectively paying off its debt by diluting your share of the pie. But this process is not hitting everyone equally. It is the primary engine of growing inequality. This is the Cantillon effect. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they inject it into the financial sector first. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and BlackRock get the new money at zero interest. They use this free cash to buy assets before prices rise. By the time this new money trickles down to the average worker in the form of wages, prices have already risen. The rich get the money before inflation. The poor get the money after inflation. This is why we see a K-shaped economy. The asset-owning class sees their wealth explode, while the wage-earning class sees their purchasing power collapse. This dynamic forces a fundamental change in how we must think about saving. The old advice of the 60-40 portfolio is financial suicide in a world of fiscal dominance. If you save in cash, you lose. If you buy government bonds, you lose purchasing power. We are entering an era of forced speculation. To simply preserve your wealth, you are forced to take risks in stocks, real estate, or crypto just to outrun the devaluation of the currency. But the final tool in the government's arsenal has not been deployed yet. It is currently being built in the basement of the Federal Reserve, the central bank digital currency, or CBDC. Right now, physical cash is the ultimate check on government power because it allows you to exit the banking system. A CBDC removes that exit. If the dollar becomes purely digital, the Federal Reserve gains total control. They can implement negative interest rates instantly or put expiry dates on your money. The transition to a cashless society is not about convenience. It is about control. It is about ensuring that there is no escape valve when the great wealth transfer accelerates. The verdict is clear. The United States is defaulting. It is a slow, polite, and bureaucratic default, but it is a default nonetheless. The $38 trillion will never be paid back in real terms. The winners will be those who own scarce assets, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, profitable businesses, things that cannot be printed. The losers will be those who trust the currency and the institutions. We've discussed how the government uses inflation and digital control to slowly seize your wealth. But history shows that when a government gets truly desperate, they stop being subtle. They simply take. In 1933, the United States government did exactly that. They criminalized the ownership of the one asset that allowed citizens to protect themselves from inflation. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, seizing the gold of every American citizen under the threat of 10 years in prison. In the next video, we are going to tell the full, uncensored story of the Great Gold Seizure, the secret prosecutions, and the terrifying legal precedent that allows the president to seize your assets during a national emergency. Today, you need to know if your safe is actually safe. Smash that like button to keep the signal alive, and subscribe so you don't miss the history of the gold ban. I'll see you in the vault.